Thank you for listening to the Amateur Church Podcast. I'm Pastor Matt, and I'm so thankful that you are continuing to read through the book of Esther with me. This week I am struggling with strep throat, and so this is going to probably be a very short episode for you. Today is our devotion questions from the book of Esther, and so I'm just going to list those questions for you to try to save my voice a little bit. But I do want you to know I'm praying for you, and hopefully you are walking through the book of Esther with me. I love the book of Esther. It's a great gospel-centered book. Though the name God is not mentioned in the book of Esther, we see his handiwork in the midst of every page. So based on our theological truths from yesterday's podcast, I want to give you 5 main questions as you walk through the book. Now, please give me a little grace as I don't expound on many of them. Just walk through them yourselves. But 5 questions that you can talk with your small group or your family over this week that will aid in your devotional life. The first, we see Ahasuerus or Xerxes deals with pride in sending Vashti away. And in doing so hurts her. The question I have is, when has your pride caused others harm? Did someone address it? And how did you learn from that experience? A second question that I would like for you to consider is that in chapter 2, when the king holds these, as many have called them, beauty pageants, but we know it's even more than that, with particular nights with the king and sexual intimacy. Consider the work that went into finding a maiden for the king. And it says that they were trying to make them favorable in his sight. Now, consider how the world has their own standard of beauty and what all that looks like, and how we try to appear beautiful and favorable to others. But also think of Christ dying to bring us to him and making us favorable in his sight. How does that comparison between what the world does and the sinfulness of the world, but then Christ, his death, burial, and resurrection, and his receiving us to himself and making the putting on a robe of righteousness of us, how does that enrich your understanding and appreciation of the gospel? Number 3, in chapter 4, we find that Mordecai tells Esther that for such a time as this, she has been brought to the palace. What are the particular opportunities and services that God has called you right now to for such a time as this? Discuss that with your small group. Number 4, Haman became overcome with jealousy and envy and bitterness, especially when Mordecai would not bow down to him. He complains to his wife and then gets the idea to build the gallows. What places in your life are left open to that same temptation? And how are you guarding against jealousy and envy and bitterness? How have you seen that play out in others' lives and maybe even in the local church? But what are you doing right now to keep yourself from being jealous or bitter towards others? And then finally, my last question for this week. At the end of Esther, and you'll read that this week, God turned a horror into a holiday. He turned this horrible circumstance in which the Jews might have been killed into a holiday of Purim, which they would celebrate. He allowed the Jews to defend themselves. This can be a picture for us of spiritual life and spiritual warfare. And how are you engaging in spiritual warfare? Talk about the importance of that in our lives today. And as we close out this very brief episode, I want to give you the memory verse today. Esther chapter 9, verse 22 sums up the conclusion of the book and the rejoicing that takes place. It says, "Because on those days the Jews rid themselves of their enemies, and it was a month which turned for them from sorrow into gladness, from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and rejoicing and sending portions of food to one another and gifts to the poor." A beautiful conclusion in Esther chapter 9, verse 22. Hey, I love you. I'm praying for you, stakes in the ground.